Hello and welcome to another episode of We're Walking Back in History. And you know what, Donna, every time we've done this, you've reminded me of something I've forgotten. You've reminded me of things that my old coach used to talk to me about. So I'm hoping the viewers, the fans that listen to this really enjoy it and enjoy the walk back through boxing history. And welcome.
Thank you.
So today we're going to, we touched on Joe Louis, but it's probably about the time when he picked up the title to the point of him losing to Rocky Marciano, and looking at his story, and looking at how he managed it, how American were with him, and then how Rocky Marciano dealt with the responsibility of turning over a hero, a bit like, I don't know, Larry Holmes beating Muhammad Ali.
Yes, that happens sometimes.
Yeah. So in his day, when he was on top form, Joe Louis, what he had, power, punch precision for his age he was second to none.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, debatably, he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. The name always comes up in the discussion of any great heavyweights, and many, many times it's considered he was the best that ever lived. And if you judge just on the record, John, very hard to argue against that point. Very quick synopsis of Louis. Was a Golden Glove champ at the light heavyweight in the 30s. He didn't go to the Olympics because he turned pro before 36, or he probably would have been in the Olympics at that time, which were in Germany, the famous Jesse Owens Olympics. Having said that, he turns pro in 34. By the end of that year, he's already a top 10 contender. That's how meteoric his rise was. By 1935, 2 years into his professional run, he was the #1 heavyweight contender in the world. Gets sidelined quickly with the loss to Max Schmeling, but that didn't bother him. 8 weeks after losing to Schmeling, he comes back and knocks out another former heavyweight champion, Hall of Famer Jack Sharkey. Has a number of fights and then finally gets to fight Jimmy Braddock, but they basically have to bribe away from fighting Schmeling to give Louis the opportunity. He defeats Braddock, and then he takes off on a run that lasts 12 years, 25 heavyweight championship title defenses, unprecedented. To give you a little perspective, the previous holder of the most defenses before Louis was Tommy Burns, who defended his title 12 times. Louis doubled it. He was fighting once 7 times for the title in one single year, and probably would have equaled that in 1942 had World War II not intervened. He lays off for 3 years, comes back, fights again in 1946, and successfully defends his championship 4 more times before retiring. Makes a comeback, doesn't regain the title, fights again, and then ends up losing in his last fight to the great Rocky Marciano.
So you look at him, you look at the character. The character of Joe Louis was probably shaped by the antics of the character of Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson was braggadocious in your face. He was loud. He was brash, and he really drew a line with that divide with the color bar. Joe Louis then came along, and he managed to get everybody to fall in love with him, get everybody excited about him, get everybody to fight his corner, to fight for the world heavyweight title. So to do that in the manner he was. Again, unprecedented. Nobody had been able to have that crossover appeal.
He was amazing. He was the antithesis, obviously, of Jack Johnson. And whatever Joe Louis did in his private life, the press kept it private. And Joe Louis, he was apolitical, basically, until the war came along. And, of course, he went into the service and served the country for 4 years, gave up all of that revenue, gave up fighting, did exhibitions primarily when he was there, public appearances. But that boosted morale incredibly. He was a man that was embraced by every race. America got behind him, and he was the right man for the right time. He was there right at the brink of the war, and he united the entire country ethnically, racially, and he was the kind of personality that would do that. He was not in any ways a polarizing force. There was a story many years ago, Esquire magazine ran about the Untouchables, and they had Albert Schweitzer and Eleanor Roosevelt and Jonas Salk, and Joe Louis was among them. This is how revered and loved he was by a national icon, no question about, and a great, great fight.
In doing this and some of the research, looking back on it, and you know about it, but until you actually look again, you then appreciate how good he was. He was years ahead of his time. He mastered that art, that style of fighting at that time. Because now you're looking years on, and there's different styles have developed, different punch styles, different defensive and offensive fighters. He mastered it to a T. Power in both hands, could fight on the inside, could box, could move for a heavyweight. And you saw how he translated that from fighters the same height as him, or fighters that were taller than him. He knew exactly what to do and how to do it. And maybe that, because he could punch, because he could create excitement, grabbed the public's attention.
Oh, well, a knockout puncher is what people always want to see. You can be a brawler. I mean, you were a master technician and a boxer, and were able to defend over a dozen times, right? I remember you as a cruiserweight champion very well. Unfortunately, you weren't Nigel Benn, because the guy dropped the hand, let's slug it out, Arturo Gatti, and you led a short, happy life. That's fine. It may not do the best for the fighter at the end. But Lewis was able to mix the two. He could box, he could punch, he could counter punch. He was not Muhammad Ali, obviously, on his feet, but he had perfect combination punching and a great right hand. He had a master trainer in Jack Blackburn, who himself was a great fighter and became a great trainer. Bud Taylor and Sammy Mandel, terrific fighter in the Chicago area where he was based. But Blackburn had fought Sam Langford. He had fought Joe Gans. He had boxed Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, Harry Greb. So he fought the masters when he was coming up. So he imparted all he knew on this young fighter who also had the benefit of what he learned from another generation of boxing. They probably took the absolute limit combination of ability and learned knowledge.
Well, you saw him get through his career and really slide through it well. And then I think the first time he ever probably experienced any negative booing, should I say, was probably when in his first fight against Jersey Joe. Jersey Joe, he could box, he could punch, he was very unassuming, but could bang as well. And for the first time in his career, they questioned the victory, they questioned the win, they questioned, and that was kind of the turn of the tide, where you may thought, wow, now for the first time, I've seen this guy can lose, can be beaten. Yeah, of course, against Melody, he got hit, he got that, but he undertrained and prepared and came back and fixed that wrong. But against Jersey Joe, that's when he experienced something really surprising to himself. And that probably was the beginning of the decline.
Well, I honestly think, we don't know what would have happened. It's always good to speculate. We remember with Muhammad Ali when he had the layoff between 67 and 70. So, that was some of his greatest years that he lost. He was just peaking. And Joe Louis in 1942, he had scored 2 victories. He had knocked out in rematches Abe Simon and Buddy Bear. Buddy Bear in one round, he'd fought him before. Bear knocked him out of the ring and qualified. Simon had gone 13 rounds the first time. Tough fights, but he improved. Louis was always better in the rematch. He knocked out his guy because he learned from his errors that he made the first time. But after the war, Louis probably deteriorated more than any other boxer with that interruption of his career.
Well, why do you think that was the case, Don? Why do you think that was the case?
I think there's a lot of dissipation. A friend of mine once said, no fighter improved more with the war, from the war, than Ezra Charles, who served in the service and had a 2-year break. And no fighter declined more than Louis. I just think it was many years away. He led the highlight. He really wasn't, he wasn't in combat, obviously. And he was having a drink with a serviceman. He was going out with them, man. God knows how many women were available to Joe, in England and France, where he was, and running around. I think that he had a tendency to put on weight. If you look at the Joe Louis of 1946, who fought Billy Conn, and you look at Joe Louis of 1942, it's a transformative person. You'd say here's 50-year-old. If you looked at Lewis and Walcott, who were basically the same age, but they aged at different degrees. Walcott had never had that opportunity to live the great life that Lewis did. He was virtually a king. And you said, here's 50-year-old Joe Louis. You would have believed it because he looked like a 50-year-old man in today's standards. So he was balding. He was getting heavy. I think he developed some problems. He had heart disease and stuff like that. It was just starting to show itself. So it's just that his career declined. And remember, he had a phenomenal career. He had made 21 defenses of the title up to 1942 at an incredible rate. As I said, he's 7 title defenses in 1 year, constantly boxing exhibitions. You burn out. I think he just burnt out. And that lull where he wasn't training every day, wasn't keeping himself fit, eating a lot, drinking a lot, out late a lot, not doing, like he would prepare for a title fight every 4 to 6 weeks. I think that took its toll, and they just, fighters reached their peak, and Lewis did.
I usually see that with fighters when some complacency sets in, and of course when you start fighting, you want the wealth, you want the successes, you want the fights, and when it becomes easy, should I say, then we take our eye off the ball because what we've taken for granted, that mindset that's got us to the top, we take it for granted. Then all of a sudden you're getting beaten by guys that would never have beaten you many years before. I remember Marvin Hagley saying the hardest thing to do is something along the lines of getting up to, silk pajamas to go run in the morning. Once you've acquired those riches, those wealths, that lifestyle, it's very hard to stay hungry, stay motivated to do all the things that got you there in the first place. So could that distraction of being finally on it, they had to keep him busy. Like Mike Tyson, you had to keep him busy.
Yes, that's right. And again, he would just deteriorate. And I'll tell you, Walcott was a greatly underrated fighter going in. He was so skidlow, John, that no one gave anybody a chance against Joe Louis. He was a favorite in the Marciano fight going in after they knew he was gone. But it's not just gamblers are not sentimental. There's a sentimental favorite with the public, but a gambler's not going to make you a favorite unless they think you should be the favorite. And so Walcott, here's the exact opposite. They turned pro about the same time. In fact, they were going to be signed by Blackburn, and Blackburn picked Lewis over Walcott. Walcott was on home relief. He had a large family, 8 kids. He had no income. He was fighting for $300 in fights with Tiger Jack Fox. Brutal wars. He got knocked out there. He was fighting his way up from every contender. He gets a title shot almost 20 years after he turns pro, remarkably. But this is a hungry guy in his 30s. Not a worn-out guy, not a guy who made millions, had every he ever looked at, had dined with the president and royalty and billionaires, had met the most famous sports in the world. Walcott was under the radar, and he came in hungry, and he fought the fights of his life there, and sportsman, you win or lose, they don't care who you are, therefore that's sportsman. So, I mean, he happened to fight a guy that they greatly underestimated, I think, going into that fight. But still, Lewis, was the favorite going in, but you could see he was completely gone.
And like you say, Lewis was that kind of fighter where if you beat him once, you didn't beat him a second time. And so he knew what he had to do the second time coming through because of Walcott's unorthodox style of as though he's going to defend, then he comes in on an attack. Time goes on. He eventually gets in there with Ezzard Charles. Ezzard Charles was younger, fresher. In my opinion, I don't think it was technically as astute as Joe, but age is a great beneficiary to any fighter coming through. Yeah,
true. And again, Charles, another fighter. Well, he's in the Hall of Fame, and people talk about him now as the greatest light heavyweight. Remember, he won the heavyweight title. It was a dominant light heavyweight. Couldn't get that title shot at Gus Lesnovich, whom he subsequently beat. So he moves up to heavyweight. In those days, you could be 185 pounds to be heavyweight champ. And just a truly great fighter. And he outpoints Lewis. He doesn't stop him. Lewis still goes 15 rounds where the guy's perceived as one of the greatest fighters of all time. And he makes a comeback after that and fights another 8 fights leading into the Marciano bout.
Then of course comes Rocky Marciano. This guy looked like a light heavyweight, flat-footed, aggressive. And yes, of course, in his day, I don't think Marciano. I think Marciano's style would have been made for Lewis, but it was time is everything, and time catches up on us all. So now Joe Louis gets in there, and it's reported. I don't know if it was that one or the Ezzard Charles fight. It was reported that was the only fight or one of the final fights where he said, "I actually don't want to leave the dressing room. I should have taken this fight." He knew. We all know. We know. We hope nobody else can see it, but he knew.
Yeah, he did, obviously. I mean, he fought a guy undefeated in about 40 fights, Rocky Marciano. He was the coming man. He was like the hot guy, and he was incredibly well conditioned, a tremendous punch. Of course, he didn't have the skill level of Joe Louis. Few of any fighters ever lived did. And again, this was an older Joe Louis, 37 years of age. He's been fighting since the early 1930s. Again, Louis was a great, he never won the heavyweight title and retired one day before fighting Braddock. He would eventually got in the Hall of Fame on his record up to that point because he was such a phenomenal, great fighter. So he was great then. He was great through the 25 defenses. And as we talked, he managed to win 8 fights, knocking out Lee Savol, the guy that had a claim to the heavyweight title, and beating Jimmy Bivens, a Hall of Fame fighter, before he fights Marciano. But it was just one was coming and one was going, and they just met at that particular juncture of their careers. And Louis was done and got knocked out by a guy who probably could have knocked out anybody at that point, and did. He knocked out Moore. He knocked out Walcott. He knocked out Charles. So You knew he was a phenomenal fighter and a great puncher. And Lewis met his end. And to his credit, he didn't fight again. That was the end.
And before we touch on Rocky Marciano, the hardest thing in boxing is walking away. It's an addictable drug, boxing, and Joe Louis ended up, in exhibition bouts. He ended up wrestling of all things, and and it was probably, it's sad to see, and I'm quite sure we've seen it even in today's boxing world, where you see fighters that have just gone on for too long. And it's just because you remember him when they were in the height of their career. The youngsters thinking, "Who's this guy? What everybody's going crazy about? What is he doing? Why is everybody paying so much attention to him?" But yes, went into promoting, went into to everything possible. Yeah, he was lost. Would you say he was lost? Would you say would you say he was trying to find that fix that boxing gave him?
I think when you achieve, I have never done it, but when you achieve that kind of celebrity, we've gone to the point, you were champion of the world. I had good earners worked with a lot of world champions. And then my earning capacity changed. It just happens in life. In this business, it's what you did the last time out. And you have peaks and valleys. It's very hard to adjust your lifestyle when you're going into the valley. When you say, well, I'm going to level off here. I'll never have what I had before, but I got to find a way to live in this lifestyle now. And for people on that upper level, like a Joe Louis or a Ray Robinson, I go from making relatively millions like Joe or hundreds of thousands in this day, and it crashes. Your income doesn't go down by 80%. It goes down by 90%. And you still want to live that lifestyle. And you still want to go out and pick up the check. And they expect you to. Here's famous Joe Louis. Well, they say, yeah, but he's not making what he made. He's making a tenth of that. Doesn't matter. So he became a professional celebrity. I just don't know. I interviewed him one time, and he was saying people shouldn't feel sorry for him. I'm not standing around with a cup on the corner. He was making $100,000 a year as a greeter in Caesars. And every wealthy gambler would give him this and that, just to stand there and take a picture of him, just put their arm around him and give him, I wouldn't say a handout, but Joe Louis never wanted for anything. But of course, he never was the Joe Louis who was fighting like a great footballer. Was never that again. Had the glory years. It's very hard, I think, to adjust to that. See the next generation of fighters come up and they're getting the glory and they're making more money. Hard for guys to just, to accept that.
To be at peace with himself. I remember Mike Tyson saying, "I'm not as wealthy as I was, but I'm happier." And he's nowhere near as wealthy, but you're nowhere near commanding the same kind of dough. But I think it's that inner peace. And I suppose as long as long as boxing doesn't make you who, as long as you can't exist without being that boxer, that superstar, that top of the tree, because eventually it goes. If you can live without that, then you can live on. But it's the ones that still want to be treated as though they are the champion of the world, existing champion of the world. That's the ones that struggle. And I see it today. I see it in many fighters today that have had their day. So then Joe Louis loses, and he loses to Rocky Marciano, whose record stood for years to be broken unbeaten. And Rocky Marciano, that was the beginning of something else.
Yeah, well, it was a new generation coming up. And I'll tell you, first era of television. So you're more famous. I mean, Louis was famous, but a Marciano will see more people see him fight in one night than had seen Joe Louis through his whole career up to that point. Probably more people have seen Joe Louis in their living room fighting Marciano than saw him when there were 80,000 people at the Schmeling fight or in the newsreels afterwards. So it changed the whole tenure of boxing. That's how a Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson become so worldwide famous. Louis was famous, but this is different. This is instantaneous fame in front of millions of people immediately. It didn't have. You
mentioned. I'm just picking up on something you said. You mentioned you interviewed Louis.
Yeah.
Where was that? When was that? How was that?
I was working for Boxing Illustrated, and he was a wrestling referee. He knew us all, stage. And they were at Madison Square Garden. So I got he had an agent, and I called and they asked, could I get an interview with Joe Louis? And they said, come on, before the show. It was like at 6:00, come to the dressing room. And he was in the hallway, Madison Square Garden. And he was very nonchalant. We were just talking, what about this fight? How do you feel now? What about people saying, you're destitute? And then he sort of laughed. He said, they shouldn't feel sorry. I said, I lived like a king. I met everybody in the world, the most famous people. And I spent my money. He said, I would do it different today. He laughed. I remember that. And it was the brief interview was about, we talked about 40 minutes, which wasn't bad with Joe Louis, I remember
did he have his wits around it about him? Was his speech slurred at all? Was he still compos mentis? Was he still, how was he?
He seemed okay at that point. Now, this was in the early 70s, I would think, about 1972, 73. So, he did deteriorate quickly. His father had a history of mental illness. And Joe there's a book written by Barney Nagler about Louis, where he alternates in the chapters, one about the career and two about the private life and when he was in his institution, which again, because of the respect the world had, it was kept pretty quiet. A lot of people didn't even know that. It could have been, public knowledge if people wanted to pursue it, but it wasn't there. And again, in the days before the internet, you did have more privacy.
When you talked about being in an institute, how long was he in an institute for?
It was a couple of years from what I understood. And they said he might have had a heroin addiction. So all sorts of things. That's why a lot of people became very close to Sonny Liston. And, there's all sorts of intrigue about how Liston died and why it happened. And there was a famous gambler who ran casinos out there, Ash Resnick, whom I also know was a great fan of sports fan. You go there, he'd comp you for a week. If it had anything to do with sports or boxing, he just loved it. But he got in a very vicious argument with Louis. And they thought it was because he was spending money and this and that. But one of the people have said, and from familiar with that in Las Vegas, that the argument, because Ash was very, very close with Joe Louis. He got him the job as the greeter at Caesars. And that Liston was supplying drugs to Louis. Now, Liston idolized Louis, but maybe he thinks, hey, smoke some pot, we're going to snort a little cocaine. That was a good thing to do because he was helping out his buddy, giving his buddies on it. Wasn't to his benefit, but he figured, hey, we're going to smoke together, chase girls together, whatever they did together. And Ash was furious at him for what he did. Again, this guy is like a legend, an icon.
Well, I'm quite sure down the line in these shows we'll touch on Sonny Liston, his life, his career. Back to Rocky Marciano. Rocky Marciano now is a new hero. He's a new TV star. He's the guy that beat the man that beat them all. Jersey Joe took him out. I know Jersey Joe was past his best, but Rocky Marciano beat the best that was out there at the time with his style of fight. It was fan friendly.
He's spectacular. Knockouts in 49 undefeated fights is an amazing percentage of knockouts. And these were real knockouts. He didn't just punch you and give you a bloody nose and they stop. He knocked you cold. He sent Carmine Bing to the hospital and the guy never fought again. He knocked Savold. It was Savold's last fight after 150 and he had fought every contender. He was a brutal puncher and would never stop coming. His nose famously split in half by Ezra Charles in their rematch, and they were ready to stop it. They probably would have in today's condition. And he came out and knocked out Charles in the next round before the referee could intervene. I mean, tremendous, incredible heart. And amazingly, he walked away from it. That's very rare. As you know, it's almost impossible.
At 49 fights, you'd think I might go for one more. 49 fights, I'm done.
Yeah, he just gave it. I mean, he was very hard to train. He had a very, very difficult relationship with his manager, Al Weil, who he found had been cheating him. There was a famous story where Weil had taken $10,000 in Rocky's fight with Don Cockle, the fight before his penultimate fight before Archie Moore. And Marciano found out about it and assumed he'd been stealing all along. So it was a very difficult thing for him to do that. He was very tight with a buck. And I guess he'd rather than give Weil any more money, he decided I won't get it. And remember, Rocky could always make appearances. He would always make money on that. So he could survive.
But Don, you know what I like about that? I like the fact that a fighter was able to finish boxing instead of boxing finishing him. There's not many fighters that have actually achieved that. Lennox Lewis was one of them. He finished boxing before it finished him. Rocky was one of those as well. And there was no smell, no sniff of him coming back. And that to me is inspirational because there was the old cliche of old fighters where they were punch drunk, broke, cauliflower ear, boxing till you just gone on too far. Rocky was smart enough, sharp enough to say, "No, I'm done. I'm out of this."
Yes, it's amazing, and it's a testament to his fortitude to do it. And I'm sure every promoter would love him to fight again. He would have made millions of dollars. It was just the dawn of the closed circuit era. You can see conversely, Ezra Charles, I think, got 15 or 20,000 in one of his title defenses. Floyd Patterson came along about 4 years later and was making $250,000 in lesser opponents because of the closed circuit and the TV.
Crazy.
Millions in the 3 fights with Johansson. Incredible. That's how it changed. And Rocky was at the forefront of that. He would have been able to take advantage of it, but he retired.
You see, that's the same. My old trainer again, Brendan, said same story, different actors. You look at boxing today. You have pay-per-view TV where guys are getting a percentage of the revenue there, and the guys that are fighting, the guys you probably got paid 10 grand to fight 5 or 10 years ago, and so a lot of mini millionaires are being made because more eyes can be on the prize, which again is most important.
No, it's great. It's unfortunate for the guys coming up, though. It's harder. Like now, I don't know the practices there in England. You basically pay for your early fights. So, you know, most of us in the business, whether you're a fighter or an agent, a matchmaker, you come up from a poorer family. You're not upper middle class. You're not. And so if a kid doesn't sell tickets here, how does he fight? I don't have people to sell tickets for. I mean, 5 tickets. They make you pay for your fight, your opponent. Well, that's not a way to develop fighters. I mean, the kids who need it the most can't afford to do it. So unless they get a rich manager who subsidizes them, they're stuck. Less and less shows. So the developmental end needs to be boosted up here. Whereas in Lewis's day, you had, I don't know, hundreds of fights taking place a year in the United States. That's been cut down maybe by 10%. At the top, it's phenomenally great. At the bottom, it's very hard. It's the old saying, you can get rich or go broke, but you can't make a living.
Yeah. But that's how you find the diamond in the rough. So, because there are many, many unbelievable fighters that we don't know about that don't sell tickets, I haven't got that conversation that can be had between them and the fans. There's many fighters that are like that are brilliant, but then someone will slip through the net and everybody goes crazy. You look at I don't know, the likes of Roberto Duran, who's street fighting to be part of his fitness, you know, and I'm quite sure if you look back at many fighters, it's the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They fight their way up. I wish the big promoters would run talent shows with just 4 and 6 round fights, maybe once a month, 5 or 10 6-rounders, and get these kids work, whether they sell a ticket or not. It's a reinvestment in your business. It's getting new stars to develop, whether they can sell a ticket. They will eventually. You start to see them fight, and people say, I want to see him. I don't have to know him. I don't have his friend. I will look at this guy, and he's exciting every time he's in the ring. Let me watch this guy. Or he's winning every time or he's a skillful boxer. And, you know, I know as a fan, when I saw you'd follow a boxer. I'd say, oh, that's Johnny Nelson. I said 6 rounds. Now he's moved up to 8 rounds. I would follow your career from the beginning all the way into your championship. And you could do that in those days. And now it's much harder, but every fighter will develop a fan base if you give him a chance.
Don, you've given me food for thought. I've enjoyed this week's edition. I look forward to the next one. Take care of yourself. Speak soon, and what's his page?
God bless, John. Thank you very much.